Welcome back to Faith and Freedom 250, a special series from the Herzog Foundation celebrating the Christian foundations of America's story as we approach our nation's 250th birthday. Today we explore 4 simple words that appear on our currency and carry a powerful message about the character of our nation. In God we trust. Those words didn't appear suddenly or arbitrarily. They grew out of America's long history of faith and its belief that liberty ultimately comes from God.
Distilling the essence of a nation as diverse as the United States into just a few memorable words is no easy task. The ideals that fueled the founding of our country and the 250 years of history that followed have provided much to say about the character of our nation and its people. Yet since 1956, 4 simple words have carried an enduring message: in God we trust. These words are more than a phrase stamped on our currency. They express something deeper, a national humility and a recognition that we depend on a higher power. And this idea didn't just appear overnight. It grew organically out of America's long, faith-filled experience.
When we look at the writings and speeches of the founding generation, it is not surprising that in God we trust eventually rose to prominence. At the time of the American Revolution, citizens routinely turned to the Almighty for guidance, strength, and fortitude. They thanked their Creator for victories and blessings. They often referred to God as divine providence, acknowledging that their liberties and rights flowed right from Him. God was very much a part of public life in the early United States. George Washington, in particular, frequently made public and private appeals to Providence. By doing so, he set a powerful example for the nation to follow.
But "In God We Trust" wasn't the first motto of the United States. On August 10, 1776, a small committee that included Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson proposed a different phrase for the first Great Seal of the United States. The phrase was "E pluribus unum," out of many, one. These words captured what was happening along the eastern seaboard as 13 separate colonies united to form a single nation. In 1782, under the Articles of Confederation, "E pluribus unum" was formally adopted and placed on the Great Seal of the United States. Although it never became the official motto, it served as the nation's de facto motto and remains an important part of our national heritage.
The phrase, "In God We Trust," first appeared on United States coinage in 1795. However, it was dropped from most gold and silver coins during the 1830s. The words appeared again on the national stage during another moment of crisis, this time in poetry. During the War of 1812, as British forces bombarded Baltimore, Francis Scott Key wrote a poem inspired by the defense of Fort McHenry. In the 4th stanza, he wrote these words: "And this be our motto, in God our trust." More than a century later, that poem became our national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner.
5 decades later, the phrase gained even greater meaning during an even more serious national trial, the American Civil War. As the Union increasingly viewed the conflict as a moral and spiritual struggle for the soul of the nation, leaders looked for ways to reinforce the righteousness of their cause. Secretary of the Treasury Salmon P. Chase supported placing a reference to God on United States coinage. He believed it would remind Americans of the nation's reliance on divine providence and affirm that God stood above the conflict. So in 1864, "In God We Trust" appeared once again on newly minted United States coins. Then the Coinage Act of 1873 made the inscription a legal requirement on American coins.
For nearly a century, that tradition continued. Eventually, it led to formal recognition of what had already become a deeply rooted national expression. Once again, a global crisis served as the catalyst. After World War II, the world faced a new ideological conflict. Many nations fell under the influence of the Soviet Union and its atheistic communist system. A Cold War emerged between East and West. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who had served as Supreme Allied Commander during the war, recognized a growing desire among Americans to distinguish the United States morally and spiritually from the Soviet bloc.
So in 1956, Congress formally adopted "In God We Trust" as the official national motto. This was not a brand new idea created in the 20th century. Instead, it acknowledged a belief that had been present in American life for generations. The words reflected a national character that had existed since the founding of the nation.
Today, in the 21st century, some Americans question the relevance of a national motto, especially one centered on God. But the motto matters because it says something important about who we are and where we came from. "In God We Trust" expresses humility. It reminds us that Americans are ultimately accountable to a higher authority, not merely to a government. The founders believed that the rights they fought for were gifts from God, not privileges granted by the state.
The motto also connects citizens to the founding documents and ideals of the Republic. Alongside the national anthem, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the monuments we preserve, it binds Americans together around a shared civic inheritance. Critics sometimes object to the motto, but those objections often misunderstand its purpose. "In God We Trust" does not establish a state church, favor a denomination, or compel belief. Its role is ceremonial and historical, reflecting the nation's past rather than imposing doctrine.
In an age when many want to remove faith from the public square, the motto serves as a reminder of our history. It keeps a foundational truth visible in everyday life.
"In God We Trust" remains today what it has always been, a statement of national character. It connects Americans today with the founding generation and reminds us that through every crisis, trial, and triumph, this nation has drawn strength from the faith of its people. That's this week's edition of Faith and Freedom 250, a special series from the Herzog Foundation celebrating the Christian foundations of America's story as we approach our nation's 250th birthday. Join us again next time as we continue exploring the faith that shaped our nation.